I think it's fair to say, and it's accurate to say, that the electric utility industry is really the backbone of both the state and the nation. And that's because everything else, as you think about it, is really connected to that. Water utilities, in many cases, need electricity to run. Same thing with telecom and private industry. It is often incorrectly referred to as the world's most complicated machine. It is very highly integrated, and it is also built to be highly redundant. And that is one of, I think, the points of pride about the power grid. It's also highly regulated, not just by the PUC, but the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and the National Electricity Reliability Corporation. At this point, FERC and NERC were empowered in the Energy Policy Act of 2005 to oversee extensive reliability standards nationwide, and those are primarily over the bulk transmission system, so those really big transmission lines. While this doesn't extend down to the distribution systems, that's where the PUC comes in overseeing those systems. But it's really those outages of the large lines and those big transformers that tends to have the most widespread potential to impact a large number of customers. Beyond the weather events that we've sort of talked about, hurricanes, tornadoes, windstorms, drought, and the like, there are also many other threats to the power grid. And those are things such as domestic and international terrorism. There are threats from cyber attacks, again, both domestic and international. There are physical threats that cover everything from folks backing cars into power poles to intentional physical attacks on the grid to copper theft, which will interrupt service to customers. And I think it's fair to say that there's also another significant threat. It's an insidious one. It's systemic, and it's distributed to the grid, and that would be squirrels and other animals. And I say that only somewhat jokingly because that I think it's important to remember that these emerging threats are very important and they're very challenging on cyber events and other things. But most power outages are caused by weather and by animals getting into the grid. And that's important because the core and best practices to protect the power grid are really the same no matter which one of those threats you're talking about. And it's the three-legged stool of prevention, resilience, and recovery. So prevention encompasses ensuring that utilities are doing proper vegetation management, are putting proper shielding around equipment that seems to have squirrel problems, proper maintenance, robust cybersecurity programs, and take all those other reasonable, prudent, and necessary steps to safeguard their systems, recognizing that there is no silver bullet that's going to prevent damage to systems from either weather or these other attacks. Resilience, and I think Mr. Magnus will touch on this more, is ensuring that the grid can take a punch, so to speak. Losing one piece of equipment, one transmission line, doesn't result in a big collapse. That's what the grid uniquely, I think, among industries in the country is designed to do. It is highly redundant, and frankly, this state's commitment to adding transmission and adding distribution, Representative Oliveira stepped out, but the Rio Grande Valley is a good one. We're adding a lot of transmission to help beef up that area so that if we have a problem on one transmission line for whatever reason, there's another line feeding into the valley. It means utilities can, that robust grid means utilities can shift load to alternate circuits when need to, either through automation or through manual efforts. And in many respects, that happens with customers never knowing that it's happened, and that's largely the goal. Because there's no foolproof way to completely protect the grid, robust recovery plans are also critical. And again, Bill, I think, is going to touch about this. But that's again, a wide range of things, everything from the mutual assistance arrangements that utilities have with other utilities both in the state and around the country to bring in crews when they need help clearing damage, as well as using smart meter data to help pinpoint where outages are occurring for speedy recovery, and then plans to actually restart the grid in the event of a complete collapse. Lastly, and I'll end on this, these are challenging, and some of the emerging issues on cyber and other things are really challenging. And I think it's incumbent on regulators to be very cautious about being overly prescriptive in this area. Simply put, the pace of technology is so fast that the last thing I think any of us wants for utilities to start managing the 3-year-old regulations instead of what the most current and best practices in network defense and resiliency are. And that's not to say there's not a role for regulators or government. Again, these are monopoly utilities, and we have responsibility to ensure that they are taking prudent actions. Increasingly, many of these efforts can really only be managed through the collaborative efforts between the utilities, the private utilities, and governmental agencies. Bill, again, will touch on that some more. And those efforts are growing. I think the electricity sector is out in front on a lot of those. And that, I think, ultimately is the most productive way to address many of these challenges. So I'm happy.